Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Yitzchak Rudomin, and today we will be studying and reading chapter 4 from the book of Genesis, Bereshit, Perek Daled in Hebrew. Bereshit is the name for Genesis. Perek is a chapter. Daled is the Hebrew letter for 4, symbolizing 4. So it's Genesis chapter 4. Please feel free to pull out your own edition of the Torah, of the Bible, whatever text you have available, and follow along with me. It's also a partial Bible Torah reading. I will be using this text, The Living Torah by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. And here you can see the English name, The Living Torah by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. And it's a beautiful text. And the subject of this chapter is the story of Cain and Abel. Now, one of the things we'll be introduced to over here is the subject of sacrifices. That Cain and Abel will be offering sacrifices. And this becomes a theme throughout the Bible. Now, in ancient times, and even in some so-called, what we call today in the Western world, primitive cultures. But Judaism is not primitive, and certainly what the Torah did is not primitive, and God's commandments are not primitive. The Torah commands, and you see that even without commands, Cain and Abel offered up various types of sacrifices to please God, like slaughtering an animal, offering from the wheat or the produce of the fields. So this requires a little bit of understanding because we don't have this in the Western world. Certainly for the last 2,000 years, since the destruction of the Jewish temple, the second temple in Jerusalem, Jews have not offered sacrifices. We only study the subject. We only include some of this subject matter in our prayers as if they were substitutes for actual sacrifices, but there are no animal or any other kind of product sacrifices, which does not mean to say that the purpose of a sacrifice is removed, as we'll see in a minute. There are differing opinions among the Jewish sages concerning the purpose of sacrifices. There's the opinion of Maimonides, Rambam, with a mem at the end, Rambam, Maimonides, also lived about 1,000 years ago. And he says sacrifices are there as a kind of wake-up call to man, that when a person commits a sin or a crime, so it's a kind of substitute, and when he sees the sacrifice being offered up there on the altar, he should think, wow, that could be me going up there as that sacrifice. You know, God could be taking my life, and instead I'm substituting it with this sacrifice. Or giving a gift. So that's sort of Maimonides' kind of explanation. I'm simplifying it. It's more complex than that, just for simplification purposes. And then there's Nachmanides, the Ramban with an N, with a Nun, Ramban, who says, no, that you see that sacrifice has nothing to do with being a substitute for man's sins, that you see right at the very beginning, like in our story here, in our chapter 4 of Genesis, you see that Cain and Abel offered up sacrifices, and this was before anybody committed any sins. It was a way of expressing one's heartfelt connection to God. And this brings us to focus on the word for sacrifice in Hebrew. In Hebrew, a sacrifice is a korban, K-O-R-B-A-N, transliterated in English. And a korban, in Hebrew, words have roots. The word korban comes from the word karov, close, because a sacrifice brings you closer to God. It's a way of expressing your closeness to God. You want to show your appreciation to God. You're giving him a gift. So you offer him on an altar, you offer him an animal or produce. And it's, by the way, it's very significant because in ancient times, like the Aztecs, the Incas, and many ancient civilizations, the Carthaginians, for example, in ancient times, offered up human sacrifices. They cut up their babies. They took people and cut out their hearts and then roasted the hearts or roasted the bodies. And in pagan cultures, offering up human beings as sacrifices to the gods, to the pagan gods, was very much something that was done. So actually, Judaism is very sophisticated. It weans mankind away from that way of doing things, and it offers animals instead. You see, there's something in it. It's sort of the concept of a gift. I mean, what's the concept of a gift? When you love someone, when you adore someone, when you, shall I say, you worship someone. I mean, like people worship the stars or something like that. I mean, pop stars and celebrities. You want to give of yourself. You want to give something. You want to give a gift. If you have, you're very close with someone, you want to give them a gift to your closest and dearest, to your wife, to your husband, to your children, to your fiance, whatever it is, to your special other. The concept of giving a gift is very much so, and there's no limit. The sky's the limit. People give thousands, millions, even billions. They give it away. Even in a divorce settlement, a couple, a man will give away billions because he still has that residual feeling, presumably, or that was part of a relationship. Maybe I'm pushing it as far as that's concerned. But you get the idea that it's the concept of giving a gift. So this is a gift to God. How do you give a gift to God? What, you throw like an object into the sky? Not really. There's various ways of doing it. Eventually in the Jewish temple, there'll be animal sacrifices, there'll be vegetable sacrifices, there'll be wine sacrifices, there'll be oil sacrifices, there'll even be water sacrifices, water libations. A way of giving a kind of recognition and honor to God or to aspects of God that sacrifice accomplishes. Okay, so that's a subject we're going to be seeing in this chapter. Before I read the full chapter, I want to read the first verse and then get into a little bit of Hebrew grammar. I myself personally am not a grammarian, but sometimes it's necessary to stop and to talk about it. As we see over here, the first verse of the chapter, remember the chapter ended last week, chapter 3, with the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. So what happened next? What did Adam and Eve get up to next? They canoodled. That's what it says. V'ha'adam yada es chava ishtoi v'tahar v'teled es Cain v'tomer kanisi es v'kanisi ish es Adonai. V'ha'adam yada et chava ishto v'tahar v'teled et Cain v'tomer kaniti ish et Adonai. I'm reading it in all the Sephardic, the Israeli, the Ashkenazic ways of doing it. And the translation is, the man knew his wife Eve. She conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I have gained a man with God. Okay, that's the first verse. So what's all that about? Now, in the English, it's translated as a straight sentence. The man knew his wife Eve, meaning the Adam. Adam knew his wife Eve. She conceived, gave birth to Cain. She said, I have gained a man with God. And she gave birth again, this time to his brother Abel. And Abel became a shepherd while Cain was a worker of the soul. That's really verse 2. Okay. So let's take a closer look at the Hebrew using the Rashi. I'm going to use this edition. You can see it's an old edition of it's a linear translation of the Pentateuch and Rashi's commentary. I'll show you. You can see Pentateuch and Rashi's commentary. by Rabbi Abraham ben Isaiah and Rabbi Benjamin Schaffman, in collaboration with Dr. Harry M. Orlinsky and Rabbi Dr. Morris Charner. Genesis, a 1949 edition by SSNR Publishing. I don't know if that publisher is even around anymore, but this edition is around. You can ask for it's called, I think, the Schaffman, the Pentateuch with Rashi's commentary, Chamisha Chumshe Chumash, in Pirish Rashi, with the linear translation. So I want to look at that first verse in chapter 4 and point something out to you. Okay? And it says as follows, looking at the verse again, V'ha'adam yada es, or et chava ishto. So there's this word et, aleph, taf, et, e in English, et, not et extraterrestrial, but et. So v'ha'adam yada et chava ishto, so that's the one et. Vatahar vateled et Cain, and then she conceived and she gave birth to Cain. So it's the second et. Vatomer, and she said, Kaniti ish et Adonai. I bought God. I acquired God through. I have gotten a man with the help of God. She gave birth with the help of God. And verse 2 says, I'm going into verse 2 because it has the continuation. Vatosef laledet, and she again gave birth, et achiv, et hevel, vayehi hevel ro'et soin, v'kain haya aved adama. And Abel was a shepherd, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. So now, what's the deal with this word et? Can I show it to you? It's an aleph and a taf. It's actually the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And there is no translation for this word et. The way the Torah uses it is to learn something out. Like, for example, when it says, V'ha'adam yada et chava, it could have said, V'ha'adam yada chava. The man knew Chava, meaning he knew her in the carnal sense. So what does it have to say et? That he knew her, or there is no translation for it. And then it says, Vatelet et Cain, and she gave birth et Cain. Why does it have to say she gave birth to et Cain? It could have just said she gave birth to Cain. Why et Cain? And then Kaniti ish et Adonai. Then it says, I have acquired a man with God, et Adonai, with God, what is it? It could have just said, Kaniti ish Adonai. What's with the et Adonai? And then it goes on, verse 2, Vatosef laledet, and she gave birth, et achiv. It could have just said, Vatosef laledet, she continued to give birth to his brother, laledet achiv. What's with the et achiv? And then Hevel, okay, giving his name. No, but it doesn't say just Hevel, it says et Hevel. Why does it have to say et Hevel? Right? So what's with all these ets? Now, if you do as I did and you look up online a way to explain this, because I know it's a difficult way, it's a difficult word to explain, it's amazing what you come up with. For example, look at this. It says, look it up online. This is from websites that explain Hebrew grammar. The word et does not mean anything. So how can you have a word that doesn't mean anything in Hebrew? In modern Hebrew, in regular Hebrew, it doesn't mean anything. It's the most common word in the Torah. It's the most common word in Hebrew. 2% of all Hebrew words used will be et. Yet, it doesn't have a meaning. It doesn't mean anything. It is, listen to this, it's a structural word that tells us something about the grammar of the sentence. Okay, it's a structural word that tells us something about the sentence. The word et comes before a definite object. Okay, you guys out there who knows what a definite object is, You are great grammarians, because I don't know what a definite object is. I'm admitting my ignorance. I told you I am not a grammarian. But I know when it's important to stop and try to explain something. And you'll see you don't need to have a knowledge of grammar to appreciate the word the way the Torah uses it and the Torah commentators use it. And it has no equivalent in the English language, and therefore is difficult to translate. Wow. It has no equivalent in the English language, and therefore is difficult to translate. From another Hebrew grammar website, I got this. It's the most frequent word in Hebrew, right? It doesn't even mean anything. It has no equivalent in English. We saw that. It's a preposition used to introduce the direct object. Good luck to you if you understand that. A preposition used to introduce the direct object. Furthermore, it's also used when the direct object is a proper noun, right? Getting deeper. It's used between a verb and the direct object it refers to. Should I repeat all of those? Okay, no, I hear all the no's. And then in English, it's like the article, sort of like the article a. So it's it has no real translation. But let's see how it's used here in the Torah in this first verse in chapter 4 of Genesis. V'ha'adam yada et chava ishto. V'ha'adam yada et chavat ishto. So, okay. Nothing on the first et chavat ishto. Nothing in the Rashi. Nothing in the Rashi about the first et chavat. V'ha'adam yada kvar kodem ha'inyan shalmayla kodem shechata. So Rashi is telling you when Adam knew his wife, he was carnally knew his wife, meaning they had sexual relations, marital relations. So these Cain and Abel were conceived and they were born before the sin, although Cain was tainted by the sin of the serpent somehow. We'll hopefully we can get to that. Now, and Cain comes from the word kaniti, I have acquired. The kaniti, liknot, it means to acquire. So it comes from the word to acquire. Al Shem kaniti et Adonai, k'mo im Adonai. So why does it say et Adonai, not just kaniti Adonai, k'mo im Adonai? It's to tell you, it's to denote as if shebara'ati ve'et ishi hu levado bra'anu, that when God created, I'm going to switch into the yeshivish type of tune, that when God created me and my husband, he created us alone. God did it alone. Aval bazeh shetufim anu. But with this, we are partners with him in it. Meaning, in the birth of Cain, God becomes a partner with us. Meaning, God created Adam and Eve on his own, without any partners. But in the creation of Cain, through conception and birth, so God is a partner. So this comes from the Talmud in Nida, one of the tractates, and the concept is that there are three partners in the creation of a man. Gimel shutfim ba'adam, three partners in the creation of a man. Your father, mother, God. Oh, you can whatever order. God, your father, and your mother. Your father and mother give you your body, and there's descriptions in the Midrashim of your mother gives you certain parts, your father gives you other parts. Whatever it is, scientifically X and Y chromosomes, all of that stuff, I'm not going into that, but your soul is given to you by God. Like it said, that God breathed into Adam the soul of life, likewise into every human being that's born, God breathes a soul. So the soul is the actual life force inside that person. So that's why she called Cain, I acquired him because I have acquired et Cain ve'et achiv. I acquired Cain and Abel through this act. Let's look at it again. Al Shem kaniti et Hashem, kamo im Hashem shebara oti ve'et ishti hu levado baranu, aval bazeh shetufim anu imoi. So her giving birth creates a kinyan. It's a kind of, she's saying that it's an acquisition. In other words, she's taking it a step further. For example, when a husband and wife get married, so the man does a kinyan, he acquires the woman, she becomes his. When a person buys property, he acquires the property. So he becomes different in that way. So in this way, she's making a kinyan through giving birth. So she herself and her husband now are partners in creation. So she herself is acquiring a portion in creation, in humanity, in life. Okay. Now, it said, et Cain, et achiv, again with the et Cain, et achiv. So Rashi himself remarks, and by the way, Rashi doesn't get into this, although Rashi himself is a grammarian. There are many, many Rashi teachings. By the way, you understand what I'm saying by Rashi. Rashi is a commentator, Reb Shlomo ben Yitzchak, or Shlomo ben Yitzchaki. He lived in France, in southern France, about 1100 years ago. He's considered to be what we call one of the Rishonim, greatest commentator on the Torah, especially on the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, and on the Talmud. His commentary is essential. And his style of commentary is pshat. It's called pshat, simple meaning. So Rashi himself is a grammarian. He gives many, many examples and explains verses in a grammatical way, which is difficult for me because, as I told you, I'm not a grammarian. I'm admitting to my faults. And he certainly doesn't go into this detail of the modern day grammarians where they give you lists and lists and lists of what et could and couldn't be or should and shouldn't be. And it is correct, but it becomes so confusing that you don't know whether you're coming or going. You just have to learn how to speak Hebrew, get familiar with the language, and how the word et is used. It's the most common word. But Rashi uses it the way Chazal use it. Chazal means Chachamenu Zichronu Livracha. Our sages of blessed memory, they use it to learn something. In other words, an extra word, like an extra letter sometimes, can be used as a ribui, as something to meaning and something to include, in addition to which. So it comes out, the gist of it is, the conclusion is that it's not an extra word, it's actually there to teach you something. So Rashi says, when she said, Vateled et Cain in verse 1, and then she said, and the verse says, and she continued to give birth, et achiv, et hevel, his brother, et achiv, et hevel. So Rashi says, Gimel itim ribuyim, 3 additional eitim. That's what he says. Gimel shlosha itim ribuyim heim. The 3 instances of et indicate augmentation, the commentary says here. Melamed, so what does it teach you? Sheta'aymanolda im Cain, that a twin girl was born with Cain. So in other words, Shivatelet et Cain, because it could have said she gave birth to Cain. Why did it say she gave birth to et Cain? So et is to hint that there was an extra birth, and that was a twin girl. So Cain was born with a twin sister. But in the case of Hevel, it says, et achiv, Cain's brother. By the name of Hevel, it says it twice. So why is that? Why do you think? If Cain was born with one twin, and that comes as a result, how do we know that? As a result of the Torah saying et one time. So if it says et twice, what do you think Hevel was born with? Right, 2 girl twins, 2 of them. The im Hevel noldu shtayim, and with Hevel 2 were born. Lekach ne'emar vatoisef. That's why it says it was an addition. Vatoisef laledet. She additionally, these are nuances in the Hebrew language, she additionally gave birth. So they were born with twins. And this, by the way, is significant because in the commentaries, what they explain is that, when I say commentaries, I'm talking the classical rabbinical commentaries. What they explain is that one of the things that made Cain jealous of Abel was that Abel had 2 twins, and Cain only had 1 twin sister. And in that time, this is before the Torah was given, before there was a moral code, they were the only people on earth originally, so they married each other's sister. They married their sister. Cain married his sister, and Abel married his sister. Yes, at that time, incest was not illegal, was not a crime. Only much later, when the Torah comes along and teaches us the mitzvot, the commandments, does incest, marrying a sister is totally illegal. It's against the Jewish law, it's against the Torah. But at the time of creation and the first people on earth, that's what they did. Cain married his sister and Abel married his 2 sisters. But Cain was jealous. He said, wait a minute, why should you get 2? Why not me? So that was one of the things that ticked off Cain and made him jealous. And it led to a murder, don't forget. Cain is going to kill Abel. And one of the things we're going to see is that Cain always finds an excuse to do things. Okay, now that we've spent time on the introduction, let's get back to the body of the chapter and read it finally. So if you have your edition of the Torah, we spent a little bit of time here on explaining the first 2 verses and explaining the word et, explaining the meaning of sacrifices. And the one more point, by the way, when it says Adam yada es chava, Adam knew his wife. So there's a concept in Torah study of dibra Torah beloshen nekiya. The Torah talks in clean language. In other words, there's no 4-letter words in the Torah. There's no dirty language in the Torah. The Torah talks like in a euphemism, in a euphemistic way around the subject. So when it says Adam had sex with his wife, it doesn't say sex. And it doesn't say he took her to bed or he went into her. It doesn't even, although later there are expressions like that. But here the expression is yada, he knew, because carnal connection, the carnal connection is the ultimate form of knowing someone, the most intimate way. It can also be the most lonely way if it's done incorrectly, but it's the most intimate way of knowing someone. So that's what it says. It says Adam knew his wife. So let's go into the chapter now. The man knew his wife, Eve. She conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I have gained a man with God. She gave birth again, this time to his brother Abel. And Abel became a shepherd, while Cain was a worker of the soil. Okay, so far so good. An era ended. Cain brought some of his crops as an offering to God. Abel also offered some of the firstborn of his flock from the fattest ones. God paid heed to Abel and his offering. Okay? But to Cain and his offering, he paid no heed. Cain became very furious and depressed. God said to Cain, why are you so furious? Why are you depressed? If you do good, will there not be special privilege? And if you do not do good, sin is crouching at the door. It lusts after you, but you can dominate it. So this is God giving counseling, advice to Cain. He's working with him, trying to shape him up. Cain said something to his brother Abel. Then when they happened to be in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. God asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Ayeh hevel achicha. Where is your brother? And he answered, "I do not know," replied Cain. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Let's just stop there. It's not a stop in the Torah. The Torah's narrative continues with this smaller parsha. But I just want to say a point about Cain killing Abel. Remember when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and God told them, he warned them, on the day you eat, you shall surely die. Okay, now Adam was somewhat remorseful, and he was granted a reprieve to live 1,000 years. He gave away some of his time to someone else. We'll learn about that, hopefully. But the point is, Adam and Eve did not drop dead because they should have. God said, on the day you eat from that tree, you shall surely die. But they didn't die. They got a reprieve. So what's going on? So where is the first death? The first death is a murder. Cain killing Abel is a murder. So we don't know the consequences of evil. We don't understand, like we do something wrong, and we don't understand that there can be a chain reaction. Like it says in the Jewish oral law, mitzvah goreres mitzvah, a good deed drags, entails, brings in its trail another good deed, and avera goreres avera, and a sin brings in its trail another sin. A misdeed brings another sin. So one thing leads to another. It's like a spiral of evil. One thing led to another, and you don't know the consequences of your actions, whether for good or for bad. You just don't know. So this is what happened. Their own children were the victims of their sin. And then you say, well, why are the children suffering for the sins of the fathers? Well, the children weren't so great. Cain was a piece of work, right? He has his own reasons, and he's guilty in his own right for doing what he did. And even Abel, there's a reason. Why did he become a victim? They say because one of the reasons, I'll quickly tell you, one of the reasons Hevel was liable for death was that when he offered his sacrifice and the Shekhinah, God's presence, came down to accept the sacrifice, that he gazed at the divine presence, which he should not have done. And interestingly, I'll just throw this in, they say that Moses is a reincarnation of Hevel. How they know this, I don't know. This is mystical stuff, but this is what they do say, that Moshe is the reincarnation of Hevel. He's reincarnated. And he perfected the sin of Hevel because when Moses came up to the burning bush and God started speaking to him from the burning bush, he dropped to the ground and he didn't look at the fire in the burning bush because God's presence was in that burning bush. Unlike Hevel, so he perfected the mistake Hevel had done, because unlike Moses, Abel looked at, and for that, you're not supposed to. It says that there were famous sages. That one of them became a heretic, one of them went mad, and one of them didn't look. It says they entered into paradise. The paradise means the orchard, but it also means studying the secrets of the Torah. And one of them gazed. Rabbi Akiva did not gaze, but one of them gazed, and he died. Right? So it's a serious matter. You're not supposed to look at God because, as it says, God says that when Moses asked to see God, God says, no man can see me and live. Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. It's in one of our Shabbat Zmirot, one of the songs we sing on Shabbos. Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. Man cannot see me and live, because God is infinite, man is finite. We all desire to see, we all want, we all curious, but the truth of the matter is it's not good for us to see God. And the symbolism of that is the sun. Whilst it's nice to have the light and the warmth, but you cannot look at the sun itself, right? So that's one of the luminaries that God created that you cannot look at. So surely you cannot look at God. That's what one of the sages told a Roman philosopher. Continuing, God said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is screaming to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground that opened its mouth to take your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer give you its strength. You will be restless and isolated in the world." Cain said, "My sin is too great to bear. Behold, today you have banished me from the face of the earth, and I am to be hidden from your face. I am to be restless and isolated in the world, and whoever finds me will kill me." God said to him, "Indeed, whoever kills Cain will be punished 7 times as much." God placed a mark of Cain. God placed a mark on Cain so that whoever would find him would not kill him. Cain went out from before God's presence. He settled in the land of Nod, to the east of Eden. Cain knew his wife. She conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was building a city, and he named the city Enoch after his son. Enoch, that's in Hebrew, Chanoch. Enoch had a son, Irad. Irad had a son, Mechuyael. Mechuyael had a son, Methushael. Methushael had a son, Lamech. Lamech married 2 women. The first one's name was Ada, and the second one's name was Tzila. Ada gave birth to Yaval. He was the ancestor of all those who live in tents and keep herds. Right, so he's the originator of wandering shepherds. His brother's name was Yuval. He was the ancestor of all who played the harp and flute. So he introduced music. And by the way, the commentators say that they used all these things for idol worship because it's based on a verse that they became idol worshippers in the days of Enosh. His his name was Yuval. He was the ancestor of all who played the harp and flute. Tzila also had a son, Tuval Cain, a maker of all copper and iron implements. And that's the beginning of the making of copper and iron, like the Copper Age, the Iron Age, making of implements for war. Tuval Cain's sister was Naamah. And interestingly, Naamah, she's going to be a good guy. She's a good lady. She's going to be Noach's wife. Naamah, if anybody asks you a trick question, what was Noah's wife's name? It's Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Tzila, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. I have killed a man by wounding him and a child by bruising him, because he killed Cain and Tuval Cain. He was blind and he was being led by Tuval Cain, and he shot an arrow and it killed Cain. And then he got so distressed that he slapped his hands and smashed the brains out of his own son, Tuval Cain. So he killed 2, this Lamech. That's why we have a Yiddish expression that somebody's a Lamech, a Lemechel. A Lemechel means like somebody like Lamech who makes mistakes, prone to mistakes. But Lamech's mistakes were fatal. He was blind. He shot an arrow, and by mistake he killed Cain, who was behind some bushes, and then he slapped his 2 hands like he was like in horror, and then somehow punched the brains. He just like punched his grandson and killed him. So that's like the ultimate mistakes, going around killing people. So that's why there's this Yiddish expression, if you're a little lemechel, you say somebody's a lemechel, it's not a compliment. I mean, it's sometimes said jokingly, but it comes from this character in this chapter 4, verse 23. Genesis chapter 4, verse 23. Lamech is the ultimate example of a person who's like useless. If Cain shall be revenged 7 times, then for Lamech it shall be 77 times. He was like really worried. Adam knew his wife again, and she gave birth to a son. She named him Seth, because God has granted me other offspring in place of Abel, whom Cain had killed. A son was also born to Seth, and Seth named him Enosh. It was then initiated to pray with God's name. So Seth had a son named Enosh, and that's what I was referring to. The days of Enosh, it says initiated to pray, but Torah is talking in a polite way when it says they started to pray, but they started to pray with God's name to idols, to idol worship. And they started using music, the guy who invented musical instruments, for idol worship. Same thing with the implements of war to kill, all used for negative purposes. Humanity was on a downward spiral. Let's take a look at a couple of other things. So that's chapter 4. Let's take a look at a couple of other things. I want to see a Rashi concerning Lamech. We're talking about Lamech. He's how do you describe him? He's like a loser. Lamech is a loser. That's the best way to describe it. Like a lamechol, a loser, a lo yutzlach, no luck. So vayikra kol Lamech, Lamech took shtei nashim. Lamech took 2 wives. Right? So here we have the mention for the first time. He's the world's first bigamist. Although Hevel was born with 2 sisters, so maybe he was the world's first bigamist, but he married his sisters. So I don't know. I'm not getting into like the nuances of incest. That I don't know for sure. But anyhow, this is the text, by the way, did not explicitly say that Hevel married his 2 sisters. It's something that we learn out from a medrash. So one needs to understand what you learn explicitly in a verse is of a higher order and greater clarity. It has a greater status than something that's learned out of an implication and a nuance. Whilst they both may be true, and somehow maybe even seemingly contradictory, but they each have a validity. But if it's something is written, it's a higher order statement in the Torah. So it didn't say that Hevel had 2 wives. It's just something we learned out from the 2 ets next to his name when he was born. But here explicitly the Torah says Lamech had 2 wives. Now it's interesting how he divided division of labor, divide and conquer with his 2 wives. He says this became the fashion of the generation of the flood. Going down, from the time of Adam, there were 10 generations from Adam to Noah. But by the time it got to the generation of the flood, things went from bad to worse. And dare I say, even in our own times, people would take 2 women. Achas lepiria v'rivya, one for having children with. Piria v'rivya means to be fruitful and multiply, to have children. V'achas letashmish, and one, tashmish comes from the word shimush, usage, meaning sex, a mistress. People would have 1 woman for marriage to have children, and a mistress on the side, or even a wife on the side. But one wife was, her purpose was not to have children. It was just purely to give pleasure. Achas letashmish, zuhi letashmish. So zu shehi letashmish, this one who gets the job of being the concubine, of being the one who's going to be the mistress, not to have the children, how is that achieved? Mashke kos shel ikrin. She's given birth control, some form of birth control, was given a drink, a cup of ikrin, which is a drug that made her infertile. Kadesha ta'aker, that should become an akara. Akara means infertile. Umekushetet kechalam, and she was beautified like a bride. Umachila ma'adanim, and you feed her the most fancy foods. In other words, you want it to be like a real item. Fancy, fancy, fancy. Like a real, a chanteuse. Is that a good word? V'chaverta, and her colleague, her co-wife, Nazufa, was troubled, was like put down, Va'avela, and is in mourning, Ka'almana, like a widow. And he brings a verse from Job, Ro'akara Loteled. He is a companion to the barren that bears not. And the almana lo yetev, kama shemafurish ba'agada chelek. And okay, so I'm not going into that. Ada was the one, he shall pirivirivia, and Ada was the wife, so Tzila was the wife. So Ada was, he's going to tell us, Ada he shall pirivirivia. So his wife Ada was for having babies, giving birth. Maybe that's where the word adder in English comes from. And adder means that part of the animal that sustains, that nurtures the calf, the babies, the adders. So her name was Ada. Ayin Daled Hey, Ada, A-D-A-H. And Al Shem Shemeguna Alav Umaseres Me'etzla Ada Targum Shal Surah. Ada is a language of Surah, put away. And Tzila, he shall Tashmish. Tzila, it's still a popular name today, Tzila. She was the one that was put aside as a mistress. Al Shem Shehi Yoshevet Tamid Betzilo, because she always sits in his shade. She's like in his shade, meaning she's there. And this comes from Brachis Rabbah. Okay, so that's that. I want to see a few items before we conclude. A few items from the Medrash says, right? It's put out 40 years ago. It has the approbation, by the way, of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and the collator. It's not really partly author, collator, the guy who put it together. It's a 5-volume set. It's also available for children. I think there's also something for the Tanakh. His name is Rabbi Moshe Weissman. There's a teaching that Kol ha'omer davar b'shem omra mevi geula la'olam. Whoever says something over in the name of its original sayer, the one who said it originally, brings salvation to the world. And the proof of that is Vatomer Esther b'shem Mordechai, that Esther spoke up in the name of Mordechai. Mentioning Mordechai brought a salvation to the Jewish people in the times of Purim when they were in exile in Persia. So Kol ha'omer davar b'shem omra maybe geula la'olam. Whoever says something over in the name of its original person, the original person said it, brings salvation to the world. So I'm saying that this is a work by Rabbi Moshe Weissman. We just read little extracts here and there. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, I'll show you, wrote an approbation. And he speaks very highly of this work. He knew the author's father. And so I just want to touch on a couple of points. First of all, the mark of Cain. I wanted to share with you, what was Cain's sign? Our sages present a number of views. He's got here 4 different interpretations You know how it is. We're talking about events that took place more than 5,000 years ago. The Torah is the only record. The Torah is not a book of history. The Torah is not a book of chronology. The Torah is not a book of genealogy. So it leaves the door open to various kinds of commentaries. So that's why there are these various opinions and commentaries. So let's see the four different choices of what it means, the mark of Cain. One opinion is that he became a leper. This would restrain people from laying hands on him because they would be afraid of the disease, or because it signified that he had already received his punishment from the hands of Hashem, that's God, and was equivalent to a dead man. Because there's different kind of conditions that makes a person considered to be as if they were dead. As if, like, Metzora is choshev kameis, and ani is choshev kameis. A beggar is considered like as if he was dead because he has no connection to the world. And the leper also is cut off from humanity. Thank God we don't know so much about leprosy today. It's still a disease out there today, but it's a terrible disease where the body rots and you can't be among people, put into a leper colony. So one interpretation is that he became a leper. Let's see where that's from. 295, very small print. Taf Tzaddik, he has it here in the back. I'm going to show you. Taf Tzaddik, Tiferes Tzion, that's the name of the source that he's citing. Hashem gave Cain a watchdog. One of the interpretations of the mark of Cain is a watchdog, having a dog who would warn him of any approaching danger. No source given for that, but I assume it's from somewhere reliable, because the author is reliable. Number 3, a horn grew on Cain's forehead to help him fight off possible attackers. Now this I have heard also, same source, Tiferes Tzion, and actually one of the interpretations says that's why Lamech killed Cain, because Tuval Cain they saw a horn, so they thought it was an animal, so they shot in that direction. And in the end, it turned out to be Cain that they killed. By the way, when it says horn, I mean, it could, again, people say, well, how could a man grow a horn? That's ridiculous. What, a unicorn, a human who's a unicorn? Well, why not? I mean, what about, let's say, the guy from Notre Dame? What's the deformed guy from Notre Dame? Whatever. First of all, there are people born with deformities, so that's not so far-fetched. But he wasn't born with a deformity. God gave him a deformity. The shape of a horn grew out of his head. Doesn't sound so far-fetched, but that was the mark of Cain, one possibility. And the fourth possibility, which comes from Medrash Agada, also that's from a Medrash, Hashem engraved a letter of his divine name on Cain's forehead to protect him. One of the letters from God's name, it was an engraving, like a tattoo on Cain's forehead. And finally, if we have a few minutes, now the misfortunes of Lamech. We said Lamech is he's prone to halak, and Rashi brings this commentary, but it has it in more detail here. Okay, let's just read this last little section here. Lamech, Cain's descendant, used to go hunting. It says, Lamech at that time had already raised children who were the 7th generation since Cain. Okay, so Cain's time was coming up. Lamech, Cain's descendant, used to go hunting with his son Tuval Cain. Since Lamech was blind, his son would lead him. One day Tuval Cain called to his father, I see a beast. Lamech drew his bow and shot it. It was not an animal, though, which Tuval Cain had spied, but Cain, who had a horn on his forehead. It was not an animal, Tuval Cain explained. You shot a man with a horn. Woe to me, Lamech cried out. I shot great-grandfather Cain. He clapped his hands together in despair and inadvertently crushed his son between them and killed him too. Right? So that's also Medrash. In the evening, so this is now what happens next. In the evening, Lamech's two wives came to look for their blind husband. Okay? They found him sitting by the corpses of Cain and Tuval Cain. They were shocked and refused to live with Lamech any longer. In other words, Ada and Sila refused to have marital relations with their husband. They gave up on him. They said, why should we continue bearing children only to have them destroyed by Hashem's retribution? Like, what's going on here? We'll have kids, and then God will kill them, so what's the point of having kids? And they were also intimating about the flood. Does it say it here? We'll see. You are wrong if you think that Hashem will immediately wipe out our family, Lamech countered. Did I kill Cain and Tuval Cain on purpose? He didn't do it on purpose. We know that Hashem suspended for 7 generations the punishment for Cain's deliberate murder. Isn't it logical then that the punishment for my deed, which was accidental, should be delayed even longer? His wives, though, would not listen to him, and therefore suggested, let us settle the matter before a judge. So who do they go to? They all came to Adam. He was the wise man. He was still alive. They all came to Adam and presented the case to him. Lamech's wives argued, our master, our husband, killed our great-grandfather Cain and our son Tuval Cain. Why should we continue to bear additional children who are doomed to annihilation? Lamech said, my master, it all happened by accident and was not done intentionally. Adam decided, listen to your husband, Ada and Sila. The world was established for the purpose of procreation. Cure your own sickness first, doctor. Lamech's wives retorted ironically, before giving us instructions. You have been separated from Eve, from Chava, for 130 years, and you now tell us what to do? Adam took their words to heart, and from his reunion with Chava, a son was born. The son resembled Adam. Just as Adam had been born circumcised, so was he born circumcised. Chava named him Shes, explaining, for God has appointed me another seed instead of Hevel, whom Cain slew. The name Shes also denotes founder of the world, like the Even Shesia, the foundation stone that is in Jerusalem, that supposedly God created the entire world from that rock, the dome of the rock in Jerusalem. So that's called in Hebrew Even Shesia, not the dome of the rock, but the rock of the foundation, the rock of the foundation. Since Shes became Adam's successor, Adam transmitted to him the 6 Noahide laws which Hashem had revealed to him, and handed over to him the heavenly garments which Hashem had made for him. So yes, and there's an interesting little expression when it says, "Doctor, heal yourself." So because Adam had separated from Eve, and the Hebrew expression is. I must share it with you. The Hebrew expression is bear with me. Here we are. It says, Kshait atzmecha tchila. They said to Adam, correct yourself first. Fix yourself up first. It's an expression in the Talmud and in Judaism. Like, look who's talking. Fix yourself up first. So that's what they retorted to Adam, and then Adam had another child with Eve, and his name was Seth. And then we'll continue reading in the next session from Genesis chapter 5. Thank you so much for your attention. I really do appreciate your interest. And please God, going forward, we'll be able to learn many more chapters together. Thank you. My email is rudomin@jpi.org and rudomin@att.net. Thank you. Shalom.